What's good in the YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here bringing you another video. Today I'm bringing a video on Lupinranger versus Patoranger, episode 28. This episode is called More Fighting on My Birthday, and the main reason why I sound fairly tired and not really into it is because I just came back from a huge Power Rangers convention in Anaheim, California called Power Morphicon. For those who do not know, Power Morphicon is the biggest Power Ranger convention that happens every 2 years. There is stuff available for Super Sentai and Kamen Rider at the convention, but primarily this is a Power Rangers convention, and it was a ton of fun. I am beyond beat, and I flew back yesterday night and I am so tired. So during this review, if I seem tired or if I seem not into it, just understand it's not that I'm not interested, it's just that I am so tired from this convention, and believe me, I wish it were longer. I use so much energy during this convention and I can't wait to go back again, but just so you understand. So I addressed that enough now. So anyway, moving on, the episode begins with us seeing that, Kairi and Umika are in the bistro. What happens is that Umika ends up going into the fridge and finds that her pudding that she had has been eaten by Kairi, and so they end up kind of flirting a little bit and having some interesting interactions. And what happens is that in the meantime, Umika's father's heading over to the bistro, and when he heads in and he watches the interactions between Umika and Kairi, he begins to target Kairi, and then Kairi tries to make the excuse of saying, well, he's also in it. And the thing is that he's focusing on Toma. The thing is that Toma says, I already have a fiance. And so at that point, he's like, well, then it's only you. And at that point, Kairi's already ran off. So then in the meantime, what happens is that we end up seeing Kairi and Umika's father running off. In the meantime, what does end up happening is that Umika is discussing a little bit with Toma, and also Kagori shows up and he shows a picture of the Lupin collection item that they're after this episode, which is based off of the Gal Cutter. For those that are wondering, yes, it was based off of Gal Cutter. I'm speaking specifically to a certain person who I follow on Facebook, who I speak to on Facebook regularly. Yes, it is based on the Gal Cutter weapon. So anyway, what does end up happening during this episode is that Kairi's running around, all this is happening, and suddenly they encounter a gangler. At that point, what happens is that Kairi tries to kind of protect Umika's father from the gangler, and what happens is they end up seeing the gangler's ability has to do with their ability to create smoke and then turn people old. So we actually see a woman turn from a nice, beautiful, young Asian teenager or young adult to an old woman before their eyes. And so what happens is that at that point, Kairi tries to defend Umika's father, and then they eventually head off to another location where they end up hiding. And what we end up hearing in the background is the Power Rangers arrive on the scene, and they end up transforming, which is very cool because this time it's the first time ever that we actually have 4 Power Rangers transforming together. Typically, Noel does not do a transformation with the Power Rangers. He does it usually with the Lupinrangers, so it was actually very exciting to see that. So that did happen. During this episode, we do end up seeing them fight, but what happens is with the smoke ability, they realize that they're not strong enough to deal with it, and so Noel makes that note, and then we end up seeing that also the Gangler is able to go into the ground and kind of half meld himself into it and dig around. So it's kind of an interesting thing. And then what we end up seeing is that eventually the Gangler does retreat, and the Gangler's name is Ryug, like Ryoga from Kamen Rider Bill, but like without the extra U and the A, like so Ryug. And what happens is that he has a pretty interesting design. Eventually the Gangler does end up retreating. In the meantime, what we do end up seeing is that Umika's father thanks the Power Rangers for their efforts and thanks them for saving him, and also is willing to comply and cooperate with them, which is kind of this interesting thing that occurs. So then following this, what does end up happening is that after they end up dealing with the Gangler, What we do end up seeing is that Kairi ends up showing up behind Umika's father and basically says, so you were willing to wait for me. And at that point, what happens is that Kairi ends up sending him back to the bistro, and they end up discussing things. In the meantime, what we do end up seeing is that Umika and Toma head off to deal with the gangler, which is Ryug. In the meantime, we also end up seeing that Degranio and the other ganglers are discussing things. Gauchi isn't really happy with Ryug, like doesn't really have a good relationship or anything, and yet Degranio likes the fact that Ryug's ability is to kind of shorten the humans' lives, because he knows that humans' lives are already very short, so it just kind of further is beneficial to him. So anyway, what does end up happening is that we end up seeing that Kairi and Umika's father end up discussing things. Kairi ends up asking if he knew about the whole situation with Umika, and what we end up learning is a little bit more backstory to Umika, which is basically that after her friend was, frozen over and presumed destroyed or whatever, what ended up happening was that she ended up leaving home, and her father forbidden it, but her mother sent her a blessing, basically saying, like, I'm for it if you're willing to do this and, get a job and all that. So that whole thing happens. Yet her father came here because it's also Umika's birthday, which Toma and Kairi have no idea, but Toma is informed by Umika, and Kairi is informed by Umika's father. So anyway, what does end up happening is that we end up deducing the fact that Umika doesn't really speak to her father, but she speaks to her mother, and so this was kind of his way of kind of trying to rekindle their connection to each other, Umika and her father. And what happens is that at this, during the situation, what ends up occurring is that, eventually Kairi does try to make it, fix things up and make things more clear for him and make him understand that he isn't really trying to seek out his daughter. And the other thing is that most of the time Kairi ends up having situations where he ends up dealing with when he has girlfriends, he tends to have issues with the fathers. So this isn't his first time, and the father initially thinks that this is as if he's a punk, but in reality it's really not that way. And this happens prior, but I'm just mentioning it anyway. So it does end up happening eventually. In the meantime, is that Toma does end up, trying to soften the situation and mention the fact that he's also had issues when when his fiance ended up being frozen over, her father ended up blaming him, and so he can relate to the pain that Umika is feeling in a way, and also the pain that Kairi probably is feeling. And so what does end up happening is that Kagori ends up trying to speak to Umika's father. In the meantime, Kairi heads off, and when he heads off, he's actually greeted by Noelle, which Noelle ends up having the magic dial fighter, and what he does is that he gives it he gives it to Kairi, and in the meantime what we do end up seeing is that Toma and Umika end up fighting the gangler Ryug. What we do end up seeing, because of information given by Noelle and also Kairi, what ends up happening is that Umika is first able to Umika and Toma are able to avoid the blast from the gas that he uses, and then what ends up happening is that following that, we end up seeing that they manage to put some things on the ground, they throw them on the ground, and what that does is that prevents Ryug from actually going into the ground and kind of burrowing around. So instead what happens is that Umika tries to do a big finishing attack, but what happens is that suddenly he manages to go into the wall, because he doesn't have to just go into the ground, he can go into walls too with his looping collection item. And so what does end up happening is that following all this, we do end up seeing that Kairi shows up with Noelle. Kairi ends up using the magic dial fighter. What we also end up seeing is, prior to that, is that Umika ends up using the Kaito boost to summon the Scissors and Blade Kaito boost formation, which is pretty cool to watch being used. And what happens is that if that's her first time using that, Kairi gets to use the Kaito boost with the magic dial fighter, which gives him a bow that he can create a magical arrow that shoots out from it by like pulling it back. Kind of reminds me of the weapon from Gal Ranger for Gal Icarus with the Gal Falcon or whatever. So kind of similar to that, especially with like the sound effects are a little bit similar. And what does end up happening is that eventually, after all that is done and said, he's able to actually blast through walls where the Gangler is and still manage to hurt him, which is pretty special because that means he can destroy enemies that are going in between walls, and that's like a pretty powerful ability. Now, at the same time, we do end up seeing eventually that there's a finishing move that occurs where Noelle does his finisher, Toma does his finisher, Umika does the finisher with the Kaito boost of the Scissors and Blade, and Kairi ends up doing the finisher with the magic dial fighter's bow and arrow. So that's pretty cool to watch that finisher happen. Ryoga's destroyed, and also in the meantime, when he's launched back, Noelle manages to get the Lupin collection item, and then in the meantime what ends up occurring is that the Patorangers show up and they're like, how come Noelle didn't tell us this information? And the thing is and how come he didn't make Ice fight them? The main reason is because he basically says that their fight style does not work in favor of them dealing with Ryoga's ability to summon the gas, because like the Lupinrangers are meant to be very flexible and they are able to dodge like really crazy attacks and all that. And when you have a character like when you have a Gangler that has abilities that are very, very dangerous and you have to move very swiftly and kind of sneakily, you're not going to use you're not going to use the Patorangers, which are meant to be more assault based and just deal like direct damage. Like, you want something that's going to be able to do like special ops and secretive work. So what does end up happening is that the Lupinrangers end up using the Glitch Striker to summon Lupin Kaiser. Eventually they end up using the Magic Dial Fighter inside, and with the Magic Dial Fighter what ends up happening is that it ends up switching to Lupin Kaiser Magic, which the main thing that it adjusts is that it actually removes the headpiece and the arm in the left arm. So that's a very important detail to consider, that both of those things get adjusted. But the ability that the Lupin Kaiser Magic allows for is that when it uses its like a ball, it opens up and that creates different things. So like, for example, one time it manages to create a closet, not a closet, like a dresser, and the Gangler has to look for the Lupin collection, like Lupin Red's mecha, and so he ends up going through the drawers, which feels like a number of different senses. Like I kind of see some inspiration from like Hurricaneger with like the kind of goofier enemies. I'm forgetting the name of the monster from that season that I'm relating it to, but pretty well known silly character. And what does end up happening is that eventually, after all that's done, what does end up happening is that the what do you call it? The Lupinrangers end up like, after the Gangler gets the item, he ends up finding out later that it's actually the Magic Dial Fighter that ends up blasting at him, and then the ball, like the black ball from like the arm, transforms into the imagery of the castle where Ryo used to love to live. And what happens is that it suddenly is used to explode onto the Gangler and it destroys him. So that's pretty cool. And then what we end up seeing is that in the continuation of this, we end up returning back to the bistro. Kairi and Toma stay behind, but what does end up happening is that Umika is told by Kagori that he has a present from her father, and the thing is that he ends up She ends up examining the present. It has some goodies and some gifts in it. And he really didn't know what to give her, but he gives her this. And what happens is that she decides to head off and meet up with her father. And she ends up doing that. And what happens is that they decide that they'll take the day off till tomorrow and just kind of be together. And it's this sweet moment where, like, Umika's father says, "So you sure you're not dating Kairi?" And what happens is that Umika's like, "No, I'm not dating Kairi." And he's like, "Are you sure?" "I'm just checking." And she's like, "No, I'm not." And it's just this continuous thing. And it's kind of funny. It's kind of sweet. Anyway, in the preview, what does end up happening, we end up seeing for episode 29, is that Kichiro is going to lose his memory. He's going to forget who the Lupinrangers are, and he's going to forget a lot of things that are going to cause a big problem for him. It will be interesting to see how things will work. I don't know if we'll be seeing Splash soon or not. I'm hoping so. Judging from the fact that the preview doesn't show Splash, what I'm guessing is that, so there was the first week, which was last week, for Lupinranger versus Power Ranger for the month, and then this week, well, actually, no, it wasn't. Last week wasn't the first week. So what that actually might mean, unless I'm mistaken, is that there won't be anything next week, but then the following week. Well, actually, no, that's not right. Because what we do end up seeing in the preview is that we actually see a Kisatsu boost, which is one that uses the crane trigger machine. So it should be interesting to see how that works. And then we should be seeing Splash relatively soon. I'm not sure if it will be next episode or if it will be the one after that. Something tells me it will probably be in the one after that. For September 2nd, which is kind of weird because of the fact that typically when they advertise that a mech is going to be introduced in a month, it tends to be accurate, although I guess in this case it may not be that way, although the preview itself just isn't clear. So we'll have to wait and see. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe. I'd love to know your guys' opinions about this episode, and I'll see you guys in the next videos. Until then, guys, I'm Crazy Samurai 71, and goodbye, guys.